He thought he could punch a black man and walk away. He had no idea that man was the FBI's best agent. Charlotte, North Carolina, a quiet, sun-warmed suburb where everyone knows each other's lawn, dog, and gossip. On Maplewood Street, everything looks picture-perfect. Trimmed hedges, kids on bikes, porch swings creaking in the evening breeze. Except for Rick Downing. Officer Downing was that neighbor. Loud pickup truck, country music blaring at 6 a.m., beer cans in the recycling bin that never made it to the curb. Most folks just smiled, waved, and stayed out of his way. He wore his badge even when he was off duty, like a shield against accountability. Then one Monday morning, a moving truck pulled into the empty house next door. Out stepped Julian Vance, tall, calm, mid-40s, dark skin glowing under the Carolina sun. He wore a maroon silk shirt, a gold wedding band, and carried an old bonsai tree like it was treasure. While the movers unloaded, he quietly swept his porch, arranged his potted plants, and smiled at everyone who passed by. Most neighbors waved back. Rick didn't. Instead, that afternoon, he tossed an old burger wrapper and a crushed soda can over the fence, right onto Julian's new lawn. He laughed, muttering, "Welcome to the neighborhood, boy." Julian glanced at the mess, then at the man. For a moment their eyes met, Rick's full of smug superiority, Julian's calm but firm. He didn't say a word right away. Instead, he took a breath, walked over slowly, and spoke with quiet politeness. "Excuse me, sir. I think these might have blown over from your side." Rick chuckled. "Yeah, sure. Blown over. Look, don't start lecturing me about littering, all right? You just moved in. Don't make waves." Julian simply smiled. "Of course. Just trying to keep the street clean for everyone." Then he picked up the trash, tossed it into his own bin, and walked back to his garden. No drama, no tension, just dignity. But that tiny act, that simple refusal to play small, lit a spark in Rick. That evening, as he grilled in his driveway with his buddies, the beers kept flowing. He started ranting. "Guy moves in with his fancy shirt, acting all superior. Thinks he's better than me. Man, I serve this city. He doesn't even know who he's talking to." They laughed. Someone joked, "Bet he's one of those city liberals from D.C." Rick sneered. "I'll show him what respect looks like." The next morning, before heading to his shift, Rick again dropped a paper bag full of fast food trash right at Julian's curb, this time deliberately. He stood there watching, waiting for a reaction. Julian came out, watering can in hand, wearing that same silk shirt. He bent down, calmly picked up the garbage, and looked Rick in the eye. "You must really hate cleaning up after yourself." Rick's face tightened. "You calling me lazy, boy?" Julian didn't flinch. "Just saying, respect goes both ways." That was all it took. Rick's jaw locked and his eyes flared with that dangerous mix of ego and anger. He stepped closer, chest puffed, hand twitching near his badge. Julian didn't move. His calmness was infuriating, like still water facing a storm. "Go ahead," Julian said quietly, "if that's the kind of man you are." Rick turned away, muttering curses, and stomped to his car. But inside, something dark began to coil, resentment mixed with fear. Because for the first time, he'd met someone he couldn't intimidate. And deep down, he hated that feeling. 2 days later, the tension finally snapped. It was a Thursday morning, warm, bright, and quiet, until Rick Downing's pickup screeched to a halt in front of Julian's house. The sound alone was enough to turn a few curtains in the neighborhood. Rick jumped out, uniform half on, sunglasses reflecting the rising sun. A coffee cup dangled from one hand, a look of irritation carved into his face. He scanned Julian's yard, pristine, green, perfect, and it only made him angrier. Julian was out front, trimming a hedge, wearing khaki shorts and that same maroon silk shirt that had somehow become Rick's obsession. Calm, focused, not even looking up when Rick approached. "Hey," Rick barked. "You got something to say about my trash? Say it to my face, not behind my back." Julian looked up, puzzled but composed. "Rick, I didn't say anything behind your back. I just asked you to keep your side clean, that's all." Rick laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Oh, that's all? You think you can just tell me what to do, huh? You think you're better than me because you got your fancy plants and your silk shirts?" Julian sighed softly. "This isn't about shirts, man. It's about respect." That word, respect, hit Rick like a slap. His smirk vanished. "You people always talk about respect. How about you respect me? I've served this city for 20 years. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Then you should know better." For a second, everything went silent. Even the birds stopped singing. Rick stepped closer, invading Julian's space. His breath smelled of coffee and bitterness. "You better watch your tone, boy." Julian's expression didn't change. "Don't call me that." Rick smirked again. "Why not? That's what you are, right?" That line crossed every line. Julian's hand tightened on the hedge trimmer, but he didn't swing it. He simply lowered it to the ground, stood upright, and looked Rick dead in the eye. His voice stayed even, steady, the kind that carried weight because it didn't shout. "Last warning. Walk away." Rick's veins bulged. "Or what? You gonna hit a cop? Go ahead, make my day." Then, without another word, he threw a punch. The sound cracked through the air, a sharp, sickening thud as his knuckles met Julian's jaw. The water hose dropped. The hedge trimmer clattered. Julian stumbled back, but didn't retaliate. Instead, he touched his lip, a thin line of blood. He looked at Rick, and for a moment, there was no anger, only disappointment. Rick's voice trembled with adrenaline. "That's what I thought. You don't belong here. You hear me? This is my street." Julian slowly straightened up, wiping his mouth. His eyes were calm again, too calm. He whispered, almost to himself, "You just made the worst mistake of your career." Rick frowned. "Oh yeah? And who's gonna stop me?" Julian didn't answer. He just looked at him, long enough for Rick to feel a chill crawl down his spine, then turned, walked inside, and closed the door. For the first time in a long while, Officer Rick Downing didn't feel powerful. He felt watched. Neighbors began whispering, phones came out, and by the time he drove off in his cruiser, a quiet storm had already started, one that would soon consume his entire life. That night, the neighborhood slept under the heavy silence of a humid Carolina evening, but Julian Vance did not. He sat on his porch, a small ice pack pressed against his bruised jaw, his bonsai tree gleaming faintly under the porch light. The hose still lay across the lawn, water slowly dripping into the grass where the confrontation had happened. Inside, on the table beside him, a sleek black phone buzzed once. No caller ID, no name, just a vibration that seemed to hum with purpose. Julian picked it up. "This is Vance," he said quietly. A woman's voice replied on the other end, crisp, professional, no emotion. "We saw the footage. Do you want us to engage?" Julian paused, watching a car roll slowly down the street. Rick's cruiser, doing his nightly patrol as if nothing had happened. He smiled faintly. "Engage." And just like that, the ghosts woke up. Over the next few hours, the quiet suburban calm masked a silent mobilization. Across 3 states, encrypted files began moving. Faces lit up behind screens in DC, Quantico, and Atlanta. Members of Julian's old task force, the Ghost Team, one of the most elite investigative units in the FBI. Julian had led them once, a legend inside the Bureau, known for bringing down billion-dollar financial rings, cyber terror networks, and corrupt officials who thought they were untouchable. Now, for the first time in years, they were back, not for a foreign threat, but for something uglier, closer to home. At 2:13 a.m., a data request quietly pinged through the city's network. Oak Creek Police internal files. By 2:15, the ghost team had them. Within minutes, they started uncovering the rot beneath the badge. 17 excessive force complaints tied to Rick Downing, 12 involving minorities, all dismissed for lack of evidence. A pattern of falsified reports, buried body cam footage, and mysteriously missing records. Chief Alley's digital signature on every cover-up authorization. One agent whispered under his breath, "This guy's a walking indictment." Julian leaned back in his chair, the ice pack melting in his hand. He could see it unfolding, the chain reaction that would ripple through the department like a slow, perfect detonation. He wasn't smiling out of vengeance. It was something else. Resolve. He knew how many people like Rick had gotten away with it. How many Julians had been silenced, mocked, or bruised and forced to move on. Not this time. He turned his phone's camera toward his bruise, captured a still shot, and sent it to the team. Caption: "Start the record here. Evidence number 01. The next morning, Rick woke up with a hangover of arrogance. He felt victorious. In his mind, he'd put the new guy in his place. He didn't notice the black SUV parked 2 blocks down. He didn't notice the plainclothes agent sipping coffee in the diner across the street, camera lens trained on him. And he didn't notice the email that just hit the DOJ's encrypted inbox with the subject line, "Pattern of Civil Rights Violations, Oak Creek PD." While he strutted into the precinct, joking with his buddies, an invisible countdown had already begun, one ticking toward the end of his career, his freedom, and the illusion of control he'd lived in for decades. Julian, meanwhile, poured himself a cup of coffee, stepped outside, and tended to his garden. To anyone passing by, he looked like a man enjoying his retirement. But behind that calm, every leaf, every breath, and every click of the keyboard somewhere far away was justice in motion. By Friday morning, Oak Creek Police Department was humming like any typical suburban precinct. Radios squawking, officers filing reports, and Rick Downing swaggering through the halls, convinced the incident with Julian had blown over. He didn't notice the quiet storm brewing. In a small, nondescript office in Quantico, a half-dozen agents huddled over multiple screens. Every frame of body cam footage, CCTV from Julian's street, financial records, and internal complaint forms were being scrutinized. Each piece told a story Rick thought he had buried. The reports of excessive force, the racial slurs, the patterns of intimidation. Julian sat in his chair at home, sipping coffee, reviewing the initial findings. He wasn't rushing. He had spent years cultivating patience, knowing the timing was as critical as evidence. The ghost team's investigation quickly exposed a web of corruption. 17 prior complaints of excessive force, 12 of them against minority residents, all mysteriously dismissed. Hidden financial instability. Rick had gambling debts and questionable credit activity, all ignored by his supervisors. Chief Ali's cover-ups. Internal memos, approvals, and mysterious lost files showing systematic shielding of problem officers, including Rick. One agent on the call muttered, "This isn't just about one punch. It's an entire culture of impunity." Julian nodded silently. "Exactly, and we'll hold them all accountable." Meanwhile, in Oak Creek, Rick boasted about his supposed dominance. "Nobody can touch me in this town," he told a rookie officer, laughing. "I run this street, this department. People like him," he waved dismissively toward Julian's house, "they're nothing." That arrogance would soon be his downfall. The ghost team didn't just stop at internal affairs files. They pulled public data. Credit reports, tax filings, property records, everything that could expose the character of the man who thought he was untouchable. Every late payment, Every unpaid fine, every suspicious transaction became a thread in a tapestry of accountability. Julian, reviewing the footage of Rick's assault on his porch, allowed himself a small exhale. There was no anger here, only clarity. He knew what Rick had done, but more importantly, he knew the system had allowed men like Rick to operate unchecked for too long. By the end of the day, the Ghost team had prepared a full dossier ready to send straight to the Department of Justice. It included video evidence of the assault and racial slurs, internal complaints showing a pattern of abuse, financial and ethical discrepancies, Chief Ali's complicity in covering up misconduct. Julian leaned back, looking out over his pristine yard. The sun was dipping low, golden light spilling across the leaves of his bonsai. Justice wasn't immediate, but it was coming. Invisible, methodical, unstoppable. And somewhere in the Oak Creek precinct, Rick Downing still believed he was untouchable. By Saturday morning, the air in Oak Creek was deceptively calm. Birds chirped, mail carriers delivered letters, children played in yards. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet reckoning had begun. At DOJ headquarters in Washington, D.C., Julian's meticulously compiled dossier had landed on the desk of the Civil Rights Division. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Video of Rick Downing assaulting a civilian, racial slurs, 17 prior complaints, financial instability, and Chief Ali's systematic cover-ups. A senior agent leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. This guy thought he was untouchable. Let's make sure he understands what that means. Simultaneously, the Ghost team coordinated with local FBI offices. Plainclothes agents began surveillance on Oak Creek PD. Every move Rick made, every interaction with his officers, every casual boast, all recorded and documented. It was like watching a house of cards teetering under a steady, invisible hand. Inside the precinct, Rick strutted through the halls, still oblivious. "Everybody knows who runs this place," he said loudly to a fellow officer. "If anyone crosses me, they'll regret it." But his words were already being captured, the perfect evidence of arrogance, entitlement, and implicit threat. By mid-afternoon, the dominoes began to fall. Subpoenas quietly issued for all complaint files relating to Rick Downing. Financial records frozen and audited, revealing debts and suspicious transactions. Internal interviews scheduled with officers and staff who had previously been too scared to speak. Chief Ali under scrutiny, as evidence pointed to deliberate cover-ups using departmental funds and quashed complaints. A single knock at the door, a plain envelope slid under Rick's desk, changed everything. "Rick Downing, you are hereby served a federal investigation notice," read the agent's voice calmly. The color drained from Rick's face. This wasn't a joke, and it wasn't local IA. This was DOJ. Federal agents. His empire of intimidation was crumbling. Chief Ali, usually untouchable behind layers of authority, received the same news, a personal summons to testify regarding misconduct and misuse of departmental funds. The very structure he had protected for 15 years was now collapsing. Outside, Julian watered his bonsai tree, humming softly. To anyone looking from the street, nothing seemed amiss. But he knew every domino would continue to fall, and soon justice would reach the man who once thought he could punch his way through civility. By evening, agents had quietly set a 48-hour window for arrests. Rick Downing's arrogance, Chief Ali's complacency, and the culture of silence that had protected them for decades were all about to collide in one inevitable conclusion. And in that calm suburban evening, the first threads of karma were already tightening around Oak Creek's once untouchable figures. Sunday morning arrived like a hammer about to fall. Rick Downing, still believing he could bluff his way through, walked into the Oak Creek precinct with the same swagger he'd worn for years. But today, the air felt heavier. charged with anticipation he couldn't sense. At exactly 9:15 a.m., federal agents arrived, calm, precise, professional. The front doors of the precinct opened, and in walked a small, unstoppable wave of accountability. Rick froze. His colleagues gawked. The man who once ruled Oak Creek like a king was suddenly just another suspect. "Rick Downing," said an agent, handing over a federal summons, "you are under arrest for violating civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 242. Rick's face went pale. The room, once his stage, was now a cage. Inside Julian's house, he watched remotely as the ghost team coordinated every move. The evidence was airtight. The security footage of Rick tossing trash and verbally abusing Julian, the punch captured in crystal clarity, records of the 17 prior complaints, including those previously buried, Rick's financial instability hinting at motives for misconduct, Chief Ali's documentation proving decades of cover-ups and misuse of funds. By noon, Rick had signed a plea agreement. His badge, firearm, and pension were revoked immediately. He would serve 24 months in federal prison, stripped of the authority he had wielded with impunity for decades. Chief Ali didn't fare any better. DOJ investigations revealed his complicity in the corruption, secret funds, quashed complaints, and obstruction of justice. He was forced to resign, barred from law enforcement for life, and personally responsible for restitution payments tied to victims' civil rights violations. The precinct, once riddled with silence and fear, entered federal oversight. Policies were rewritten, officers retrained, and for the first time, Oak Creek PD faced systematic reform. Meanwhile, Julian returned to his garden. He didn't gloat. He simply trimmed the bonsai, water dripping steadily into the soil. The man who had punched him, disrespected him, and underestimated him was now accountable. Neighbors who had quietly watched from windows and driveways began whispering among themselves. Some even came over to Julian's yard, nodding in silent respect. One little boy, curious and wide-eyed, asked if he could help water the plants. Julian smiled, handing him the hose. "Justice isn't about vengeance," he said softly. "It's about restoring balance and reminding people that respect matters." And in that moment, the calm of the suburban street felt permanent. Not because trouble couldn't return, but because now everyone knew that even the smallest act of courage could topple the largest arrogance. The news spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, Charlotte's local stations, online news outlets, and social media were ablaze with headlines. Oak Creek cop arrested for civil rights violations. FBI's ghost team brings justice to Charlotte suburb. Neighbors who had once whispered behind curtains now stepped forward, recounting years of harassment, intimidation, and injustice. Stories poured in from residents who had previously felt powerless. Julian's courage had given them a voice. Community leaders organized a walk of justice, inviting everyone in Oak Creek to participate. Children, parents, and seniors lined the streets, carrying signs that read, "Respect is not optional," and "No one is above the law." Julian, modest and composed, attended quietly, shaking hands and thanking those who had supported the call for accountability. Rick Downing, in contrast, was experiencing the harsh reality of consequences. His world, built on fear, intimidation, and entitlement, had collapsed overnight. 24 months in federal prison, loss of badge, firearm, and pension, public humiliation, and widespread media coverage. Chief Ali's career ended similarly.
he faced both legal and professional repercussions for shielding misconduct. DOJ oversight of the precinct meant that systemic reform would ensure such abuses wouldn't happen again. Julian's story became a symbol, not just of personal courage, but of institutional accountability and social justice. Community organizations used the case to advocate for better police training, fairer treatment for minorities, and transparent complaint systems. In neighborhoods, conversations shifted. Parents taught children that respect and civility are non-negotiable. Young adults shared Julian's story online, spreading a message that courage and integrity can overcome entrenched power. And even beyond Charlotte, the story inspired conversations in cities across the U.S. about racial bias, police accountability, and the power of standing up for what is right. Julian returned to his peaceful routines, tending to bonsai trees, taking walks through the neighborhood, and quietly mentoring young people who looked up to him. Yet the impact of his actions resonated far beyond his own garden. The moral was clear. One act of dignity, one refusal to accept injustice, could ripple through a community and bring lasting change. And sometimes, justice arrives not as a shout, but as a calm, unstoppable wave.
Weeks later, Maplewood Street returned to its quiet suburban rhythm, but something had shifted. The tension that once lingered like thick humidity was replaced by a sense of respect and vigilance. The story of Rick Downing's downfall had become a lesson woven into the neighborhood's fabric. Julian Vance was back in his garden, pruning the bonsai with meticulous care. The sunlight gleamed off the silk of his shirt, highlighting the calm confidence that had always defined him. His hands moved deftly, shaping tiny branches into balance and harmony, a subtle reflection of the justice he had set in motion. A little boy from down the street, curious and wide-eyed, ran over carrying a watering can. "Can I help?" the boy asked. Julian smiled, handing it to him. Of course, every garden grows better with care. It wasn't just about plants. It was a metaphor for the neighborhood, for the community, for justice, for respect. Julian had shown that change often starts quietly, with a single choice to act with integrity. Local media occasionally caught glimpses of him, highlighting the case as a beacon of social justice, racial equality, and moral courage. Schools invited him to speak about civic responsibility. Neighborhood organizations cited his actions in campaigns promoting anti-discrimination, accountability, and empowerment. But Julian never sought the spotlight. He preferred the small victories, the laughter of children, the gratitude of neighbors, the knowledge that one person could make a difference. One evening, as the sun set behind the Carolina pines, Julian leaned on his fence and watched the community he loved. Families were outside, talking, playing, and gardening. Neighbors waved at him, smiles exchanged without fear or tension. A gentle reminder of the truth he lived by echoed in his mind. Respect isn't given because of a title. It's earned through actions, integrity, and courage. And sometimes it takes just one person to show the way. The street was peaceful, the lessons enduring, and Julian's quiet heroism had inspired a new beginning, not just for him, but for an entire community learning to value justice, dignity, and equality.